Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition is Musya, the Japanese tale of horror, brought to us by Seta. Musya is a pretty obscure Super Nintendo game featuring you playing as the main hero, a spearman, who battles through multiple different levels fighting all kinds of monsters from classic Japanese horror. If you're a fan of Japanese horror and folklore, you'll definitely love the creatures in this game. While there's a lot unique and very cool about Musya, the game definitely has a few issues. There are 8 levels in the game, but you actually end up replaying 3 of the levels twice, just with some modifications and some of them having different bosses at the end. And this is one of those games that until you learn a few nuances about it, you may struggle even trying to get through the first stage. So here we go with Musya for the Super Nintendo. After the opening storyline for the game, we jump into the first level, Tengamura Cavern. Now, immediately when you get control of the character, you'll find 2 different modes of attack, either straight up spear attacks, or you can actually jump in the air and stab downward, as well as a spinning blade attack, where you twirl the pike over and over again. This is one of the more useful moves, especially early on, as twirling it will leave you invincible for a certain number of frames while moving through enemies, and can also hit enemies multiple different times. In the top right corner is your health, which is represented by the 16 little fireballs. In the center is the current magic that you have equipped, and to the left of that is your current score. You can also see your life counter in the upper right. There are various different power-ups for you to pick up in the game, including orbs that will replenish your health. You'll have scrolls, which will allow you to use your different magic spells that you have. You start off with just one, and every time you defeat the first few bosses, you gain another one. As well as temporary power-ups, and other scrolls which will actually power up your pike. Now, these are pretty much essential to help you get through the game, so I recommend searching through the different items in order to find them. For example, the item I just picked up here is one of those temporary boosts of power. I'm not sure what exactly each one of them does, and I'm not sure exactly also what they translate to, but by finding certain ones, you'll get some pretty cool things. As far as leveling up the spear goes, you start off without being able to fire any projectile, and then, slowly but surely, with gaining new power-ups, you'll fire bigger and bigger blasts out of the front of the spear every time you use it. At the end of this section, it's time for the first boss fight. I found myself the first few times playing this game getting stuck here without being able to continue. It seemed like forever, no matter how many times I attacked the boss, I wasn't really doing a whole lot of damage. What I recommend doing, first off, is use your lightning attacks to immediately do some damage. When the enemy gets closer to you, you want to run away from them and start attacking them, and you can mash the attack button as fast as possible to keep sending out attacks. If you stand on the edge of the flame attack that the monster does, you can get invincibility frames the more and more you mash. If you mash slowly, you're gonna get hit a lot. However, if you really mash the button, you can keep hitting the boss over and over again and he won't do damage to you. Not exactly the best strategy, but it's the only way I've been really able to get past this guy without a lot of luck. If you have a turbo controller, I highly recommend using it if you're going to try this game out, as your finger's going to get pretty tired during the boss fights throughout the game. Level number 2 is the Catacombs. we got the fire spell for completing the first level, and I really won't be using the fire spell. Basically, fire will erupt from the ground and do a significant amount of damage to certain enemies. One thing about the spells, though, is they don't always work on a boss. You may end up using it and wasting one of your scrolls, only to find the boss pretty much laughing at you and saying that it's no use. Some of the areas of the game do feature a few different paths. For example, this level you can take either an upper or a lower path. I'm taking the upper path the first time through, but I'll be taking a more lower path throughout. Now, another thing I haven't mentioned that you can do as far as movement goes is you can move slowly by crouching. Either hitting the L or R button will crouch you down and move you slowly in one different direction. This can be useful for sometimes avoiding some fire from different enemies or gently falling off certain platforms. After exploring the top part of the stage and grabbing a power-up, I move now to the bottom half of the stage. I recommend using the spin in order to take out some of the enemies right before you go to the next screen. And for this very large area of level number 2, I recommend pretty much just mashing the spear spin and jumping consistently forward. There's a lot of enemies coming your way, including the giant beholder-like eyes, as well as these little laughing skulls that like to bounce around, and there's quite a lot of them that you're going to have to deal with. You're probably going to take damage no matter what while working through this part. The good thing is, as long as you have at least a couple things of health, you should be able to make it through the upcoming boss, as the boss of level number 2 is significantly easier than the boss from level number 1. On the next screen, well, it's boss time. Now, the boss for level number 2 is basically a rock that will keep bouncing towards you. All you'll have to do is attack a few times, step a step or two away, and then turn back around and keep mashing the attack. Just like before, your fingers are going to get pretty tired, and if you have any of your lightning move, I recommend using it during the beginning parts of the fight to just do a little bit more damage to him. Other than that, it's just this. Step away, fire. Step away, fire. When you get close to one of the walls, be sure to go underneath of him to avoid him landing on top of you, and repeat the process until eventually he'll change color, and then of course die. It's going to be a pretty long drug-out fight. Eventually, though, he will turn colors. Now, if you have a few different power-ups, more so than even I have at this point, you'll obviously be able to get the battle done a little bit quicker. Now, when you do beat him, he will explode, so you need to have at least 2 health left or be standing farther away when you deliver that final hit. Either way, once he's done, we'll get our next scroll and move on to level number 3. The Palace of Hate is level number 3, and there's going to be some new creatures introduced in this stage. However, the strategy for dealing with the enemies in the game will pretty much remain the same, of either mixing up the twirl or doing the high jump to avoid them altogether. The high jump is done by holding up and jump, and I've been using it pretty much since the first level, I just have forgotten to mention it. Drop down here and to the right so you don't stand on the spikes and attack. This way you'll hit all 3 of the item things and then be able to pick them up without having to stand consistently on the spikes. Located here in the center is another one of those big temporary power-ups, or sometimes it'll just be a health power-up. Maybe it's just based on the amount of health you currently have when you grab the item. Over here to the right, you can either continue all the way over to the right or just drop down this hole here, and you'll move on to the second part of the level. Drop down all the way off the screen, or go all the way to the right and off screen. Either way, you'll move on to the third part. Now, the third part is a little tricky. There are 4 statues located here that can teleport you. 3 of them will just take you back to the beginning of this area, and the 4th one will take you to the boss fight. The one that we need that takes us to the boss fight, of course, is located at the very end of the area. Watch out for the little jumping statues. You can drop down here into the pit, but be sure to hold right so that you land on this platform. We can grab a couple of power-ups there, including another one of those temp ones. Then you want to drop down here. The jumping in the game and landing on platforms can be a bit tricky. You'll have to practice a bit before you kind of get used to how the game really works. Once down here, grab those other power-ups, but don't walk all the way to the right, as that's where another one of the statues that teleports you back to the beginning is. Instead, you want to jump up into that little alcove and hit that statue. Then, you'll move on to the boss fight. This is a very hard boss, especially if you don't have the power-ups that you need in order to get through it. It's a giant mud golem. Start off by moving all the way over to the right side and stand here. Mash the attack button as quick as you can. Every so often, alternating back and forth left and right to attack enemies that are going to start appearing behind you. If you just straight attack the boss, these guys will keep hitting you in the back and drain all your health, and you'll end up losing a life here. The mud creature himself does slowly back up, as you can see. So eventually you're going to have to jump over him and go over to the left side and start mashing the attack button all over again in front of him. Now he can hit you with not only the little mud statues, but also with mud directly from his mouth. Though if you keep up the mashing, you should be able to change his color in order to get through the fight. Now if you don't have the power-ups, all I can really recommend is attack him a little bit in the front, and then as soon as he backs away a bit from that right wall, jump back over him and go back to the pattern that we were doing at the beginning of the boss fight. Once he goes down though, you'll get the web sling ability, which basically just puts a bunch of spider webs on the screen and freezes enemies in place. It won't really do anything to the bosses. Now we move on to level 4, the Cave of Darkness. However, the Cave of Darkness is actually just a repeat of the first level of the game. There are some differences as far as some of the enemies' placements and stuff like that, and the boss at the end of this area will be different, but the exact setup for the level is the exact same. Now, one of the abilities I haven't shown off yet is the one we got from completing the second level of the game. This is the most useful of the abilities besides the final one, which is a heal spell. And that is this one, causes this little thing to pop out, and attacks all enemies on the screen. It does some pretty good damage to them, and can really help you out in areas where you normally would just try to have to either avoid the enemies, or keep mashing that spin. Instead, you'll be able to keep a nice steady pace of walking, as this thing will take out all the enemies. Since the level design is the exact same as the first level of the game, the power-ups are also in the same spots. So, if you knew where they were in level 1, you'll be able to find some of the health upgrades and other power-ups that you may need in order to make your way through the level. Area number 3 is the same as before. You can either use your twirling ability, or if you have plenty of scrolls left, just keep on using that level 3 spell that we got. Now this one I end up picking up, obviously you can kind of tell what it does. It sends all these swords flying out across the screen and destroys all enemies currently on the screen. Jump up here to be sure to grab some of the health replenishment, as you will need as much health as you can have when you're getting ready to fight the boss coming up. Though, there is a trick to the boss. Be careful, of course, not to fall down in the holes during the course of this level or some of the other levels. There's only a few pits in the game that are actually beneficial. Most will just end up causing you to lose a life. Now, the boss for level number 4 is a giant Kappa monster. When he first pops up, there's no real strategy for being able to avoid him. So either run away from him, or just keep mashing the twirl button in order to keep doing a little bit of damage as he attacks back and forth left and right. Once he goes off screen, jump up here and stand here, then walk away a good amount of steps. He'll then do a projectile fire that you can just hug this left wall and keep mashing attack to do damage to him without him being able to hit you. You'll just keep repeating this then every time he goes back down under the water. If you end up not getting him to spawn at that same spot, he'll end up just doing that lunge attack over and over again, which will drain your health in a matter of seconds and you'll end up losing a life. I've really found no other strategy for being able to get through this boss fight without taking a ton of damage than this. Once he's defeated, we get our next spell and we move on to level number 5. The fifth and final spell that we get is the life spell, which will replenish some of your health. It doesn't replenish all of it, but it will definitely come in handy during the final stage of the game. As you can guess, level number 5 is a repeat of level number 2. Now we're going to be using that ability that can home in on enemies a few times throughout the course of the rest of the game, so try to pick up as many scrolls as possible so that you always have the ability to be able to use it. This time during this stage, I take the bottom path instead of taking the top path, which the bottom path actually ends up being easier. It's just not as many power-ups to pick up. Using the homing attack, as you can see, will wipe out almost everything that you're going to have to walk towards, and you can just keep on moving and get to the second screen of level 5. Here, it's the same thing as before, where you'll either be just doing straight up attacks or do the twirl over and over again to help you out. You can also use the homing attack here in order to take out some of the enemies that are going to get in your way. Since our attack is a lot stronger than it was the first time we dealt with this area, I find just jumping and straight up attacking, you'll be able to hit a lot of the enemies in your way, and since you do so much damage, you'll kill them before you end up getting close enough to actually get hit by them. Though, some hits are going to be completely unavoidable with those little bouncing skulls. When we make it to the next screen, it's time for the next boss fight. Now, this boss has two different forms to it. The first form is extremely easy to deal with, just like the boss from level number 2. However, the final form of him is a little bit tougher. Basically, this doll will jump up into the air and then land wherever you're standing, so just go back and forth left and right every time he goes up, and then turn around and quickly start attacking him. With the power-ups that we have, it shouldn't take too long to break a piece of him away. Then just keep mashing the attack button until you've completely destroyed the body. He'll then become a giant mess of slime. I recommend jumping over him and go all the way over to the right pretty far and then start mashing the attack button. After he gets a little bit closer, just back up a little bit more and keep attacking. Once he does get close enough to you to actually start hitting you with his normal attacks, you'll do a big jump over top of him and go to the opposite side and then repeat the process. Hitting him a few times, backing away when necessary if you need to, or eventually he'll just change color, in which case just keep mashing the attack and he should go down in a few seconds. Time for level number 6, the Cursed Palace, which is a repeat of level 3. The first two areas of the stage are identical, and you don't have to worry about any kind of different branching paths. Just take the same path that you took the first time through here. However, that third stage where we had to deal with the statues that teleport is pretty essential to make sure you know where the right statue is right away, as hitting the wrong statues will not take you back to the beginning of that area, but instead will take you either back to the previous level or the beginning of this level. It's a pretty mean and dirty trick for the game to pull, so I highly recommend making sure you know where that statue is located that you're going to need. Just like before, you can either go over to the right or drop down the hole near the very end in order to go to the next screen, and do the same for the second screen. Now, for this screen, what we're going to do is we're going to jump over to the right side. It's a little tricky to make the jump over here. We're going to drop down. There's a power-up located here if you do want it. Then you want to jump up to the top portion and drop down here, hugging the right wall. There's the statue that you need. It'll take you right to the boss. So a very short area, but if you keep traveling and do the same path you took the first time through, you may end up in the previous level. The boss for level 6, well, is the exact same boss we fought in level 3. There's no difference here, so your strategy is going to remain the same. A pretty tough fight once again if you don't have power-ups, but you should have plenty of them at this point. Stand on that right side and just keep mashing the attack button every so often, turning around to hit the little statues that are going to be coming your way from behind. The little mud guys are a pain, but as long as you can keep a nice steady pace of hitting left and right once in a while, you'll be able to drain the guy's health and just repeat the same strategy as once he gets close, do a big jump over him, and keep attacking him. However, if you have better timing or even more power-ups, you'll take him down before he even gets close enough to you. Once he's down, we move on to the 7th level of the game, which is a different stage. Now, this level is a very short level, and actually could be kind of considered like a sub-level altogether. It doesn't even have a name, it's just you against a large group of enemies until you make it to the boss, which is located just a few feet from the beginning of the level. You must defeat all the normal enemies right here before the statue of the giant samurai will actually come to life, and you're going to have to deal with him. Now, there are a few different strategies. You can either jump straight up and keep doing the twirl attack, and if you have right timing, you can actually take him out in just a few seconds. But the safer and much easier strategy is to lure him off the top platform and go to the left side and keep attacking. Then once he gets close, jump over to the right side and keep attacking him from there, eventually draining his health pretty fast and destroying him. There is a big problem with this boss though, and that is his twirling attacks will keep going even after he's dead, and you can no longer even move yourself. So you want to make sure that you have plenty of health even when he gets close to death. So you may need to use a life spell if he does a lot of damage to you to be sure that you survive, because if you die even during his boss explosion, you'll start back at the beginning of the area and have to refight the boss. Next up is the watery prison, the final level of the game. You start off by falling with a ton of power-ups in your way. Be sure to grab plenty of scrolls as you drop down, as you'll be using the two spells, the life spell and the homing attack, throughout this final level to really help you out. The first area is filled with water, as well as some interesting looking turtle enemies and some of the eyeballs that we've been dealing with since level number 1. Use the homing attack to help you out and destroy a bunch of them, and the game will pretty much come to a crawl with the amount of enemies on screen. Because of this, you're going to have a lot of trouble sometimes just pulling off your normal jumps as you're trying to make your way out of the water. The game has some pretty bad lag jumping, meaning that while the game is slowing down, the controls seemingly will not work at times. So it can be very frustrating, especially in a pinch with a lot of enemies on screen, for you to be able to do what you're wanting to do. When you make it to the end of the area, jump out of the water and move on to the most frustrating screen of the game, in my opinion. Here you have a whole ton of skulls on spikes. There's also a giant amount of spikes lining the entire bottom of the screen, which will do a lot of damage. You have a couple of different enemy types, so I recommend using the homing attack to help you out. You may actually need to use multiple homing attacks just on the screen alone in order to get through. You have to land on the skulls precisely in order to keep moving. There's different types of skulls you can see, one's facing left and right, as well as just standing still, one's facing forward. The jumping is very tricky during this stage, and hopefully you'll have at least some health left when you make it to the next screen, and I recommend using a life spell if you want to when you make it to here. Next, you'll have some ogres. Use the homing attack to help you out, as these ogres can do a lot of damage and you must take the upper path. Falling down will end up causing you to lose life here. So just work your way slowly across these platforms, dealing with the ogres as you go by. Now, there are some platforms down below you to catch you if you do fall, but overall you want to just try to stay on the top platforms if possible. If you run out of the homing attack, just try to either avoid the enemies altogether or take them out precisely. I recommend, though, just barreling through, and as long as you have a couple of life spells, you should be okay making it through. When you drop down here, just take out both ogre guys from the far right side before attempting to move across the platform. After dropping down here, you may want to use a life spell before going all the way off screen, but as long as you have about 5 or 6 hits, you should be okay for the beginning of the fight at least. It's now time for the final boss of the game. The giant demon head will appear from the background. I recommend going all the way over to the far right side. He's going to fire giant projectiles at you, and you're going to have to bounce them back at him using the twirling attack. You won't straight up attack him at all during this first form. Just keep moving away from him and using the spin. As long as you're standing pretty close when he actually fires the projectile out, you'll bounce it right back into him. If you're a little bit farther away though, it may ricochet in a different direction and you won't do damage to him. He starts off firing them slowly at you, but the speed of them increases by the longer you keep going in the fight. Also, accidentally standing on top of him or him running into you while you're trying to move back and forth will cause some pretty good damage, so be sure to get ready to heal if needed during the course of the fight. After you take down the first form, jump up to the upper left corner and stand on top of the giant skeleton here. The screen will flash a little bit and then the final fight will begin. Just duck down and mash the attack button. Once in a while the giant rocks falling may land on you, and sometimes you can actually avoid damage from them by mashing that attack button. Eventually though, he will explode and you can sit back and enjoy the ending to Musya for the Super Nintendo. So, there you have Musya, the Tale of Japanese Horror. This actually was released in North America, despite the credits, of course, all being in Japanese. It's a very interesting title. The links to Japanese mythology and folklore, if you're a fan of that, you'll greatly appreciate it in a game like this. However, the controls can be very stiff at times, especially if the screen has too many enemies on it. Also, knowing that you need power-ups is what really makes or breaks being able to even get past the first level of the game, is what I found out. Knowing where your invincibility frames can be by mashing the attack button over and over again on certain bosses, especially the first boss, was another essential ingredient to be able to get through the game. I find it disappointing though that you do end up repeating 3 of the 8 levels over again, just with slight differences and a different boss, well, at least for 2 of the stages. But overall, I think it's a very unique experience for the SNES, and a game that is kind of surprising even got a North American release at all. The game is, of course, far from perfect, but because it is pretty unique and a little bit under the radar, I recommend checking it out if you're looking for something a little bit different that you may not have played on the system. Thankfully, the game isn't expensive and hasn't gone up to ridiculous prices like a lot of other SNES hidden gems have over the years. At the end of the credits, well, you'll have the end, and you can, of course, if you want to, reset and start the game all over again. That's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.